So I've taken this week off work. Thought I'd treat myself to a bit of annual leave. Doing quite a bit of stuff on my coaching qualification, but also trying to set aside time to kind of to just relax, to just be non-productive, which is something that I'm not all that good at a lot of the time. Otherwise, I just get into these seasons where I'm kind of relentlessly doing stuff, producing, creating, just feeling like, oh, I've got to be kind of making things. And I'm not sure whether it was a good idea or not, but I had a counselling session on Monday. And as a way of winding down afterwards, I treated myself to a trip to the movies, which, as you'll know, if you've been following me for a while, like my kind of happy place is going to the cinema, is going and just hanging out and watching a film for a couple of hours. And it's been such a long time since I've been. And I was kind of intrigued to check out Joker, the movie. I know many of you are probably listening thinking, why would you ever go and watch that? And I've talked before about my love of kind of darker films and horror films and or certain types of horror films, not gratuitously violent horror films, which again, you might be thinking, well, all I've heard of Joker is that it's gratuitously violent. It's not really. There's a couple of moments, but it's not. But yeah, I say I'm not sure whether it was a good idea or not, because Joker's not really the best subject matter to expose yourself to after kind of a therapy, counselling session. But it also made me feel better about my own stuff because, I'm not turning into the Joker. There's not a lot in the Joker that I see and think, oh, I'm at risk here of turning into him. But yeah, it's a few days on, and I'm still processing the film. Not least with this word weird, because it's something that comes up quite a bit in the film. It's a story. I say sympathetic to it. It's obviously the origin story of the Joker from the Batman franchise. Turning from Arthur Fleck into that villain, into that character. And so looking at his treatment, his issues as a child, and some degrading mental health stuff, which loses all support from both personal relationships and institutional healthcare, including access to the medication that he needs after some kind of childhood brain injuries suffered from abuse and trauma. I had a strange bit of serendipity from something I'd read the day before I went to see the film. And I've been reading G.K. Chesterton's book, Orthodoxy, which is an interesting... there's an interesting critique in it of the idea of self-belief, which in watching Arthur Fleck determined to pursue his career as a stand-up comedian felt quite apt. And I'm just going to quote what Chesterton writes in Orthodoxy. Once I remember walking with a prosperous publisher who made a remark which I had often heard before. It is indeed almost a motto of the modern world, yet I'd heard it once too often, and I saw suddenly that there was nothing in it. The publisher said of somebody, "That man will get on. He believes in himself." And I remember that as I lifted my head to listen, my eye caught an omnibus on which was written Hanwell. Hanwell was the name given to Hanwell Insane Asylum, which this is not quoting now. This is Andy speaking. Which, in doing some research for this episode, as I was kind of researching, around this stuff, I discovered Hanwell was actually used as a set, used kind of as a location for the set for the 1989 Batman film. Where, the one when Jack Nicholson plays the Joker, which is quite an interesting link. I'm not sure, what to do with it or where that goes, but it's just interesting. Anyway, back to Chesterton. I said to him, "Shall I tell you where the men are who believe most in themselves? For I can tell you. I know of men who believe in themselves more colossally than Napoleon or Caesar. I know where flames the fixed star of certainty and success. I can guide you to the thrones of the supermen. The men who really believe in themselves are all in lunatic asylums." He said mildly that there were a good many men who all after all, who believed in themselves and who were not in lunatic asylums? Yes, there are, I retorted, and you of all men ought to know them. That drunken poet from whom you would not take a dreary tragedy, he believed in himself. That elderly minister with an epic from whom you were hiding in a back room, he believed in himself. If you consulted your business experience instead of your ugly individualistic philosophy, you would know that believing in himself is one of the commonest signs of a rotter. Actors who can't act believe in themselves, and debtors who won't pay. It would be much truer to say that a man will certainly fail because he believes in himself. Complete self-confidence is not merely a sin. Complete self-confidence is a weakness. Believing utterly in one's self is a hysterical and superstitious belief, like believing in Joanna Southcote. The man who has it has Hanwell written on his face, as plain as it is written on that omnibus. So, I found that quite an interesting thing to come back to after I'd watched The Joker. It was one of those moments where I was like, I've read something that feels like it resonates here, and then went back into orthodoxy and was like, there it is, I found it. And this provides an interesting response to a question I've been pondering and continue to ponder, which is about the nature of being a weirdian, a blessed weirdian, because the word weird is used to describe the gentle rebels who, those who prod at and curiously question the status quo. But it's also used to insult those like Arthur Fleck, whose ultimate breaking point is being humiliated on TV by his comedy hero, played by Robert De Niro. And this is kind of there's this moment, there's this touch paper that ignites everything. But the fact remains that he sits outside of what is normal. He's weird on some level, seeking to fit in. So his goal is kind of externally posted, becoming a stand-up comedian. This is his thing, and he's dealing with many other issues, as I've said, including quite extreme psychosis that stems from this brain trauma after some abuse as a child, which completely screws with his experience of external reality. And so, I've been kind of delving into a few different reflections on the film and trying to make sense of it. And for those arguing that it's an irresponsible film because it's kind of sympathetic to a murderous psychopath who believes in nothing and bathes in the glory of chaos, I don't think we watch the same film necessarily. It's not sympathetic. It's kind of tragic. And pitying, I think, is a good word. He's not likable. And he's not misunderstood. There's no kind of genius. It's not one of those stories about someone who's this genius that nobody really gets. He just doesn't understand what makes people laugh. And he's got this self-belief. He's got this belief that he can be, or that he is, a stand-up comedian. But he doesn't know how to make people laugh. And he feels more and more entitled, which you see through his hallucinations, to the kind of affections and stuff of other people. And at no moment, I don't think you're supposed to identify with Arthur, which is in some ways why I think the violence hits quite extreme levels, because it's like, this is so extreme and alien. This response is so inhuman that it's designed not to be relatable. There's this kind of this fragmentation that kind of hits where it's like, well, that's not normal. Like that's not just him reacting in the way that you'd be rooting for him to react if, in the face of a bit of humiliation or whatever. When in the same way as you'd be rooting for another underdog character in another film. It's not the underdog character. It's something quite alien. And this kind of idea is what sets this unsettling tone in every encounter that he has with the outside world. It's like this unnerving thing where this tension every time he engages in a conversation with anybody else. Any time he encounters the world outside of himself, you're kind of worried. Like, is this going to be the thing that flips him over the edge? Is this going to be the thing that kind of gets him to finally crack and everything is going to fall apart and he's going to go kind of on his murderous rampage, which, eventually, yes. And in the film, there's also a nod to the danger of publicly humiliating somebody who is in that predisposition of being unhinged with levels of grandiose self-belief, that narcissistic sense of entitlement and belief in oneself. Sound familiar with any modern day political characters? I just put that out there. And I suppose in my ponderings, this idea of self-belief is an important one, and the weirdness of gentle rebels stepping outside of this paradigm. There's something encouraged and normalized about this idea of, just believe in yourself and you can do anything. And it's dangerous because it suggests that either you don't have enough belief, or it's the fault of others if you don't do what you want to do. If you're carrying that, I believe in myself, but there's people getting in my way. There's people stopping me. There's people, and that's the thing that's preventing you from, living your dreams or fulfilling your purpose or whatever. And for those with an abnormal amount of self-belief, of which there are many in this world, Chesterton's example of the actor who can't act. You just need to watch programs like, X Factor or American Idol, equivalent of that, or whatever. You see people with enormous amounts of self-belief in a talent that doesn't exist, or The Apprentice, or even just in some ways the political world. Self-belief is abundant where talent isn't. And it's not a sign of strength and security to really believe in yourself. It can be a sign of instability and insecurity and full weakness. It's what becomes dangerous when it encounters the gatekeeper who says, you can't act, you need to learn. Or the business person who says, I'm not investing, you don't actually have a business here. Go back to the drawing board, do whatever you need to do to come up with something better. That's the moment the gloves come off and it becomes the fault of that gatekeeper, the fault of that person who is saying, do you know what? You've got too much self-belief in something that has no foundation. And the eyes never turn back to look inwards. It never turns to say, do you know what? I can learn. I can become better. I can, my self-belief is probably a bit too much. But in the case of that kind of grandiose, self-believing, narcissistic, whatever, the disillusionment with the world increases. The sense of victimhood, the bitterness, the desire to make a point, to prove the world wrong and to get vengeance, that all increases. And so that feeling of weirdness, of not fitting in, takes that very different path to the one that we're talking about. This is not the kind of outsidery weird that we're talking about here. This is not the weird that we're blessed with. Quite the opposite, in fact. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm treading in slightly dodgy territory here, but it feels important to make the distinction between weird as a naturally different way of interacting with the world and weird as a victim of a world that you resent, that you feel bitter towards, that won't let you fit in. And it's like what Laurie Helgo talks about in Introvert Power, when she says that often the kind of high school shooter or the person who commits mass murder and that kind of stuff is referred to as an introvert in the same breath as being a weird loner and all that kind of stuff, all these labels that get put on. But this places introversion in the complete wrong context. For the quiet, aloof, lonely part is this desire. It's driven by this desire to fit in. It's driven by this feeling that, I've been excluded, not by an acceptance of an introvert preference and temperament. And it's precisely because they are not at peace with the fact that they are rejected from living in the way that they want to, shunned from a social circle, or seen as weird because they want to fit in and be normal. That's what their biggest desire is, to be a part of that inside. But they can't. This is not the same as just being an introvert, where you're at peace with your own temperament, with that preference. It's obviously a big generalization. I don't want to get too deep into this stuff because I'm aware it can trigger all sorts of stuff for some people. But just thought it's worth creating this distinction or highlighting this distinction. So I hope that makes sense. I apologize if I've gone places that I shouldn't. let's have a little break and then we'll get back to Jacob's book. I've gone on far longer than I intended with all of that.
Words, I had words, I had so many words that I wanted to say, but when I opened my mouth they all went away. Give me a week and I will write you a letter, because my words on the page seem to come out much better than the words from my mouth when I'm speaking aloud, and I'm trying to be saving and clever and proud. Points, I had points, I had so many points that I wanted to make, but when I opened my mouth they all sank in the lake. And come on, get together. I slip on the pavement, I trip and I fall, because I'm down in my mouth where I hit the wall. My gobbledygook, roller skates, tripping on my words and smashing into gates. My gobbledygook, roller skates, hitting the curves and my gobbledygook, roller skates, tripping on my words and smashing into gates. My gobbledygook, roller skates, I headed to curb and this is not what we planned. This is not what we planned. Oh, for goodness sake. Not making any sense to me.
I've spoken a few times about the gift of not fitting in. You know, something that Pete Rollins talks about in his pyrotheological work, and it's also something that Jacob Nordby has highlighted in Blessed Are the Weird. It's not that just as gentle rebels and blessed weirdians we don't fit in with the world around us, but it's more than that. You know, it's a gift not to fit in, and we need to learn to kind of see that. And he says we were given the ability to see things differently from other people, and that even though the price you pay feels high, you'll soon understand that it was worth every moment. And as you'll know, you know, if you're a highly sensitive person who's come to see the beauty of the trait, most people don't realize that the most precious gifts in life come hidden inside of painful wrapping paper. This idea of high sensitivity being both a blessing and a curse, but they come hand in hand. It's such a reassuring way of framing things. You know, it's comforting to know that there is beauty in the pain and that we're not alone in such an experience of the world. And Jacob emphasized, you know, what not fitting in isn't. Is that right? You know, saying we all know some people who act out in socially awkward or unacceptable ways and then make a big deal about the fact that they are just so different that nobody understands them. This isn't what I'm talking about. That's the same as trying to be weird for weird's sake. It amounts to a cry for help, but isn't authentic, and it doesn't gain them what they really want, which is acceptance by some group. Now, this is where we can draw reference to films like Joker and other movies that portray the rise of a kind of the emergence of a vengeful character. You know, someone who he wants to fit in. He wants to be a comedian. He wants the world to see that he is a comedian. He wants to make people laugh, but he doesn't understand what makes people laugh. So he takes it out on the people that don't find him funny. The gentle rebel kind of not fitting in isn't one that aims itself outwards. It's one that experiences the profound beauty of the world. It sees more than the world seems to get bogged down within. And it seeks to bring a fuller, deeper, more profound flourishing to this experience of life. Rather than asking, you know, what can I take? What can I grab from other people from this experience of life? This kind of not fitting in is underpinned by the desire to give, to breathe, to live more fully alive. It feels grief at a world that doesn't reflect this stuff, not bitterness at a world that doesn't understand them as an individual. And another difference you may have experienced, according to Nordby, is if you have the gift of not fitting in, rather than flaunting it, more likely you've tried to cover it up your whole life. And as I quoted last week, misfits who accept their gift of not fitting in are the ones who use the tension and loneliness to forge something magnificent. They inspire us to rise above our mundane and painfully ordinary circumstances to achieve the extraordinary in our lives. I mean, this sounds great, doesn't it? But what does it actually mean for us? What are the real life implications of rising above the mundane and ordinary to do something extraordinary? It can feel like a mammoth task. And when we think of it like just in those terms, it kind of is. However, what if we simply bring it back round to that gift of seeing things differently from other people and trusting that the way we see things is okay? It's the key to becoming who we are always in the process of becoming and finding that extraordinary way forward. It's not about trying to affect things or be weird or different for the sake of being weird or different. It's just about having the faith to actually see the world as you see it, to notice what you notice, to give yourself permission to not fit in. And what are some characteristics of the blessed weirdian in among all of this? Nordby says, we seem to have little regard for personal pain if it means we are following our hearts, but we usually worry whether or not those around us will be okay when we're doing our thing. We tend to get insecure and obsessive at times in our attempts to right the ship and keep up with other people or slow down for them. We become reclusive when our inner fire is depleted by too much activity that isn't aligned with our natures. So there's this real balancing act that goes on here between how we feel, what we're driven by and towards, and the outer world, other people, not wanting to, rock the boat too much. And it's so often this sensitivity, which is fundamental to our nature, but also can be detrimental to our voice and to living that extraordinary life. We worry what others will think. We don't want them to feel bad about themselves or judged if we choose to pursue a path that might be interpreted as a rejection of them and the things that they do and choose. So we kind of rein that in. We change our pace. We shift our rhythm. We slip back into the mundane and the ordinary, out of kilter with ourselves, but in step with the drudgery of a world that doesn't allow itself to be what it's fully capable of being. It's important to acknowledge here what Nordby says, that everyone, except for sociopaths, cares about what other people think. We do care what others think, and that is okay. We all care to some degree or another, and we should not be ashamed of ourselves for this. It is, however, a great liberation to learn that other people are mostly not thinking about us at all, and that we can go about our own business of living without first calibrating every action against whether or not they will like it. This is a freeing thing to just kind of dwell on for a moment. Also that people, whether or not they express it, whether they are consciously aware or not, generally have more respect for those who embrace their unique path, their uniqueness, who they are. More respect for those people than those who will do whatever it takes to fit in and to people please. We're drawn naturally towards the rebels and the renegades, those who hold the status quo and the establishment to account, who find their values drive them away from doing the thing that will help them fit in and towards the thing that is right because it's right. We see these characters in almost every book, in every TV show and movie that we watch, and we love them for it. Most people don't really see the world all that differently. They can't see those things that need to be challenged. They can't see beyond the end of their own nose. And in a world where every group or organisation thinks that they have the answer, they're peddling this answer. If you only come onto the inside, then your life will be great. It's the only way of doing things, the perfect formula or solution. And as Jacob says, the weirdos, rebels, outsiders are necessary because they hold these damaging and dangerous views up to the light. They push the rest of us to do better, to see the bigger picture, and to confront the harm that can be done on the inside of any system or way of thinking. The renegade is the pain in the arse of the establishment that always sees the truth when everybody else is blinded by the rules, the dogma, the experience. The young pretender comes in and rattles the cages, pisses people off, and shakes up the comfortable situation that people are used to. The comfortable situation that they cannot see the harm being caused from. They call them the troublemakers, the rebels, the thorns in the side. But they are the prophets, the truth seekers, the visionaries. In any system, organisation, way of doing things, progressive soon becomes orthodox, and mystery is drowned. We think we got to the mountaintop. We were lost and now we're found. The moment we think we're there, we think we're found, we think we're inside, we're in the most dangerously blind spot imaginable. We turn into conservative, small c, preservers of the status quo, fighting to defend dead wood and stagnant water. This happens in any given generation. The swell of those people trying to protect the way things are grows in time as a generation matures in the sense of getting older. Things were better in my day. We knew how to properly rebel, and we made the right kind of change happen. It's not like they do nowadays. They're just whatever. And this is rose-tinted balderdash. It's the repeated lie from one generation to the next. And Bertrand Russell explained it in this way. Conventional people are roused to fury by departure from convention, largely because they regard such departure as a criticism of themselves. And this is a really interesting thing to think about. That sense of feeling like the generations that follow are giving a personal comment on you, and understanding that that is not what is going on. Gentle rebels, sensitive, blessed weirdians can see things others can't. They feel from this prophetic observation of how things are and where they might go. And Nordby makes the point that we no longer kill the messenger like we used to. When someone questions the status quo or calls into question everything that the powers that be hold dear, and when I say powers that be, I include just the general population or even the generation in power, the generation that kind of controls the flow of ideas. When somebody calls this kind of crowd, this groupthink into question, when someone emerges with such a voice, we don't need to kill them nowadays. The powers that be simply need to buy them, then co-opt them and dilute their message. The keen edge of many a heretic's sword is blunted with cash and popularity. I really like that quote. If we bring them into the mainstream, assimilate the person into the insiders club so that they have too much to lose if they go too far. You know, a bit of rebellion, yeah, but not too much. In the sense that, always remember, you can feel like you're free to choose, but only from the options that I've set for you. The freest artists are the ones who are on the outside, who can't be controlled in that way, who can find a way to fund their work without being co-opted and bought by an establishment designed to preserve itself. The best way to fight a rebel is to bring him onto the inside and smother him with flattery. You're just what we need. You're amazing. You know, I think of Russell Brand is a good example of someone who's broken free from the inside in this sense. You know, in many ways, he completely alienated himself from the powers that be as he began to speak out on certain topics that pretty much were off limits, and he lost his mainstream platform. And this has given him the freedom to truly go to interesting places in his work, and it's given him an incredible platform of people, including myself, who used to really not like him, but find a real truth in the freedom from which he speaks now, and a freedom to say anything he wants, anything he's exploring. It's not from a place of I've gone to the mountaintop and this is what I found. It's I'm exploring this. You know, I don't have the answers, but I'm looking and I'm asking questions, and it's going with somebody as they ask questions is the real freeing place to explore the world with. You know, the freedom to say what you want without the pressure from power to rein it in or appease the shareholders. And like we see with other characters, like, you know, I suppose Julian Assange to some degree, whatever you think of him, and more pressingly, like Greta Thunberg. You know, if we can't assimilate the messenger, then we find new ways to attempt to destroy them. We employ whataboutery as a way to defame, to dilute, to destroy, to try and create this narrative of hypocrisy on somebody. Say, well, it's all well and good them saying that, but what about, I'm sure, you know, she ate something that came from somewhere, like to kind of bring these unrelated reasons to defame, to destroy. When someone is driven by values that outweigh their desire for money or other things that can be used to kind of to buy a person, to turn a person into a brand even, it can be really difficult to stop them. You know, when figures have a heart for doing something to make a difference or to highlight some monstrous issue that we have, the power, if not yet the imagination, to change. We don't like what the messenger says, so we make it about them and not about the thing that they're saying. And this is one of the consistently odd things about humanity. You know, as far back into our history as we can go, we find examples of this happening. However true something might be, if we don't want to hear it, we turn on the person telling us that we're walking towards a danger. You know, if we're, as a crowd, walking towards a cliff edge and somebody says we're walking towards a cliff edge, we're more likely to chuck that person out of the group than we are to stop walking towards that cliff edge. And so we carry on walking until suddenly we're all at that cliff edge, and we wake up as a collective and shout, why did no one say that we're, you know, at this cliff edge? How can you be, who's been navigating us here? How can you be so stupid? Whose fault is it that we're here? Or, I didn't realise that they were telling us that we were walking the wrong way. Why didn't they shout louder when they saw that we were, moving in the wrong direction? And that just seems to occur time and time again. That's I think where there's a kind of link, obviously, in, you know, talked about sensitivity and highly sensitive people being those kind of prophetic voices who can see and sense where we're going before the crowd latches on. And so we become that messenger. We become that voice that is often just tried to be extinguished, to be shut up, to be thrust out of the group. But that's part of the blessing and the curse. And so here is where we're going to end for this week. You know, Jacob Nordby's reflection on sensitivity. This is your homework before next week. And we'll come back and you can let me know what you find. And he says this: your superpower is your sensitivity. Your sensitivity is also your Achilles heel. Your greatest gift to the world is on the flip side of the same coin as your greatest wound. In fact, if you aren't sure what your gift is yet, take a look at what always brings you down. Take a look at your darkest, weakest stuff. That will give you clues. On the reverse side of your deepest shadow, you'll find your brightest light. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'd love to ask you a big favour. The best thing you can do to support the podcast, other than, you know, becoming a patron, wishing me a happy birthday, patreon.com/Andy Mort, is to rate and comment on the show wherever you're listening to this right now, your favourite podcast application, whether it's Overcast, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever. If you just take a minute to find the Gentle Rebel podcast there, leave a quick rating and a review. It really helps to get this show and previous episodes of it into more of the ears of people searching for help and encouragement and support with these topics that we're exploring. And as I say, if you want to, you know, wish me a happy birthday tomorrow, you know what to do. You can just wish me a happy birthday, or you can just ignore it because, you know, as I say, I'm not that bothered about birthdays. It's just this whole thing of trying to get you to become a Patreon supporter. So, you know, that's me being transparent. But yeah, if you want to do that, you get there's a bonus podcast waiting for your ears, private podcast feed just for rental Jebel Patreons to access. It would be I'd love to kind of see you in there, and I'd love to say your name at the start of next week's episode. andymort.com/Patreon or patreon.com/Andy Mort. They both take you to the same place. So great. For most of you listening to this, it's not my birthday tomorrow, because most of you probably listen not on the day that it's released. So this is irrelevant anyway. Anyway, I'm going to be back next time with another episode of the Gentle Rebel podcast. Until then, do remember that you are an artist, that the world needs your art. Now go and make somebody's day. Goodbye.
Angels in disguise, we can be, 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 we can all be angels in disguise, we can be, we can be.